can you explain to us how you met her father, just how that came about?
My ex and I, we were attendees at this dinner, so we got introduced to everybody's favorite Hindu professor. And he was sitting next to my ex-wife, or wife at the time, for a while, so we all had this back and forth questioning thing at the table.
So how was his demeanor when you guys are at this dinner and you're in Jamaica? What do you think about him?
He's reserved.
Reserved. Okay.
Dignified, laid back.
Mm-hmm. But still involved in, and my understanding is that he's been involved in politics actually for a long time, has had an interest in politics his entire life, I would say.
Yes, quite. I'd call him a Marxist.
A Marxist. And that is exactly what I've heard from a family member of his, that he, from the time he was very young, was always involved in Marxist meetings and Marxist groups, kind of a dyed-in-the-wool commie. I don't think that's something that he's ashamed of, by the way. I think he wrote about in the Jamaican Global Online how he was sort of raised up on the politics via who he purports to be his grandmother, Christiana Brown. But it's interesting that you said you were introduced to a Hindu professor.
Mm-hmm.
What made you think that he was Hindu?
That's the introduction. He was a Marxist, and when he was up in the Bay Area, a lot of things were going on up there. That was Liberty Park up there, where in 1964, a lot of what was going on that led to the rousing unrest of the 60s and the public demonstrations was happening. But this was the locus of a lot of things going on. The Black Panther Party was up there, developed. So it was pretty radical in Berkeley, Oakland, Richmond, and this is where the action was. UCLA was in Los Angeles, that was a bit more civilized. You know, really wild up there in the Bay Area. So he gravitated to that. That's the way I would analyze it. So there was a Marxist thing up there. Also, this was during the rise of Jim Jones, which is another thing. You know Jim Jones, the Kool-Aid and the picnic.
Mm-hmm.
Kamala's sponsor, Willie Brown, Maxine Waters, and some other people Nancy Pelosi were staunch supporters of Jim Jones. Interesting, yes. You need to look into that. You'll find some very interesting things like, hey, this was your mentor, and he was a supporter of this. So it was a center for a lot of radicalism at the time.
All right, guys, happy Wednesday. I'm really sorry that we're running late today. I am not kidding when I say that for whatever reason, as we've been doing this investigation, right before we're about to do the show, there seems to be these big breaks. And then we are just clamoring. We're all over the place trying to gather everything that we've just realized. And I had a major break in the Scamala investigation, and I am stressed. I'm actually, as I said on Instagram, at the point where I personally want reparations from Kamala Harris. I actually think all of us are now personally due reparations from Kamala Harris for this book. The ancestral blackface that is going on is out of control. Obviously, we have been investigating Beryl, and you're just not going to believe what we've actually found out about Beryl's mom, Iris. So let's just get started right away. Welcome back to Candace. Kamala Harris, if that's even your real name, I just want you to know that you have an open invite to this show. I am probably the only person that will give you a serious interview, and I feel that I deserve it. Truly, I feel that I deserve this interview, to sit down with you and learn who the hell you are, or who the hell you think you are, because it does take a lot of audacity to do what you have done. So let's just pick up with Beryl, right? That is what we have been inching closer to, recognizing that we've been lied to about Beryl. That was the big break that we got last week. And as I said, I confirmed this with relatives in Kamala's family that she lied about Beryl. That picture is not the correct Beryl. She was light-skinned, and that she had a sister named Norma. So I just kind of wanted to focus on Beryl myself, because I just felt like you get this feeling that we're so close and there's something that's in our face and we're just kind of missing it. That's how I have felt throughout this entire process. Like, Candace, what are the pieces that you're putting together here? That the picture is appearing in front of you. So I said, let me go back and just kind of write down the bullet points of the things that we know as for sure, like basically as a fact about this alleged Beryl Finnegan that we have been looking for, okay? What do we actually have as presented as fact, rather, from Scamala or Kamala's father or somebody related to her family? So here it is. I'm going to take you guys through this list. Per Donald's essay, which was published in Jamaican Global Online, we know that Beryl's mother's name is Iris, that she went as Miss Iris. Per that same essay, we learned that Iris was married to Mr. Christie, which implies, it's not for certain, that his surname could include, that her surname could include Christie. So maybe we have Iris Christie somewhere. Or also maybe perhaps that we have a Beryl Christie somewhere, because perhaps we could assume that Mr. Christie is her father. What we know as an established fact from Donald's essay is that Iris and Mr. Christie ran a cane farm near, and I don't know if I've been saying this right, but I've been saying Ainan Town, or maybe it's Enon Town. That is, again, what he put in his essay. He also let us know that Beryl's mother, Iris, was involved in the church. We then knew, per Dorothy's memories, that Beryl was extraordinarily light, lighter than Scamala Harris. And again, I confirmed that with a relative, a direct relative of Scamala. The family said, no, that is not a picture of Beryl that is put in her book, which is explosive, and every mainstream news media outlet should be reporting on this. And of course, they are not, because they are terrified of this series, because they are complicit in all of these lies. And we also know that Beryl's mother's maiden name was Finnegan. We learned this, by the way, in his essay. He writes that her name was Nay Finnegan. We're going to actually read his essay directly, because there are some things that I really want to impress upon you. And lastly, as I said earlier, we know that she had a sister, that sister's name is Norma, and that Norma was even whiter than Beryl was. That has been confirmed by relatives. Scamala is completely lying about her heritage. She pulled the good old Barack Obama, dropped a book, an autobiography that was meant to legitimatize her to the Black public. And for whatever reason, in the public's mind, when somebody drops a book and calls it an autobiography, they just assume that somebody along the way did the due diligence, and therefore it must all be true because they found it in the nonfiction segment of the bookstore, a section of the bookstore. And that's just not true. That leaves a lot of room for politicians to lie. And that's exactly what Scamala did. And you can really see when you go through this book that it is just political blackface. She fails to mention that she is majority white. She fails to mention her white family members, her many white family members. And she neglects to mention them entirely, by the way, while going through great pains to instead offer alternative Black relatives. Now, what am I talking about when I say alternative Black relatives? I mean, they are not her relatives, but she refers to them as uncles and aunts. Okay. Now I want to jump into focusing on what specifically Donald wrote in his piece, because I had to just keep rereading it and keep rereading it for clues until finally it jumped on me. I'm taking you guys on the journey that I have been on over the last few weeks. Donald wrote that, and I'm just going to read, quote, "My roots go back within my lifetime to my paternal grandmother, Miss Christie, formerly Christiana Brown, descendant of Hamilton Brown, who is on record as plantation and slave owner and a founder of Brownstown, and to my maternal grandmother," this is where we're going to focus, "Miss Iris, formerly Iris Finnegan, farmer and an educator from Ainan Town and Inverness, ancestry unknown to me." Okay, now here is the rest of Donald's piece. We're pulling this up for you if you'd like to read along. We're just focusing on the portion about Miss Iris, okay? Miss Iris, mother of 8 children too, was the sweetest and gentlest person one could meet. but underneath it was a tough farming woman who ran the cane farm at Thatchwalk near Enantown, jointly owned with her husband, Mr. Christie. She was always ready to go to church on Sunday to preach and teach about the revelations that she saw approaching the world at that time, during and after World War II, in accord with the Bible. I spent summers with her roaming around the cane field, fascinated by the mechanical operation of cane juicing by the old method, a wooden pole extended out from the grinding machine and tied to a mule, walking round and round to grind the cane, and eager to drink a cup of the juice caught directly from the juice flowing into the vat to be boiled and crystallized as raw sugar. No Coke or Pepsi could beat the taste of that fresh cane juice. It was a joy and a learning experience for me to hang out with the workers on the cane farm, see them wield a cutlass, the machete, with such flourish and finesse, listen to their stories of exploits, some too X-rated for me to repeat, and sit with them as they prepared their meal by putting everything in one big Dutch pot, cooking over an open fire in the field, and serving it out on a big banana leaf for all of us to eat sitting there. Looking back now, I can say with certainty, and all due credit to Miss Iris, that it was this early, intimate exposure to operation of the sugar industry at the local level of small-scale production with family labor and free wage labor, coupled with my growing curiosity about how these things came to be, that led me, once I started reading about the history of Jamaica, to a closer study of the sugar industry. I came then to understand its origin as a system of global production and commerce based on slave labor, with Jamaica as a key component of that system from its very start. Miss Iris died in 1981 at the grand old age of 93, and I grieved over the loss of someone so dear and close to me. She is shown here in a photo taken by me in 1966. Just back from church, proudly holding in her lap little Scamala, and confident in her firm prediction, even then, of the future achievements of her great-granddaughter, after giving her blessings by making a cross with her finger on the child's forehead. Okay, I wanted to read that to you so that you could be processing this information with me. I actually realized there are a ton of clues in here. There are aspects of this piece that never quite even made sense to me, by the way. The biggest thing that I thought was a glaring error of some description was the fact that he says that Iris was née Finnegan, so that she was formerly Finnegan, implying that she then became Iris Christie because she says that she was married to Mr. Christie. I think we can reasonably assume that within this time frame, okay, this isn't like the woke United States 2024, men were not taking the surnames of women, right? So if he's being called Mr. Christie, it's likely not because he is taking her surname. And I thought that was very strange that he wrote née Finnegan because it would imply that she was born Finnegan. And we know that that wasn't accurate because we have Beryl's birth certificate, okay? So we have Iris's daughter, Beryl's, Grandma Beryl, birth certificate, and it lists Iris Finnegan, but it says that her name is formerly Allen, okay? So he should have written Iris née Allen as the mother. So that was always something that I just had in my head as a strange question mark. We're showing you that birth certificate right now. There we have, just as he listed, in Inverness, St. Anne, born in 1917. We have Beryl Magdalene, a female, and the mother is Iris Finnegan, formerly Allen, listed as a seamstress. Okay. So parking that aside, another thing that he gives us, he writes that she lived to the grand old age of 93. So I just went in my head, okay, how many people with the name Iris, Finnegan, Christie, whatever it is, have lived that long in that particular area in this time frame? We've got to be able to limit this down to just a few irises, maybe even just one iris. Had to adjust this piece a few times because of wrong dates for his grandparents. So lo and behold, I come across on Ancestry.com this entry of an Iris Christie. I'm going to show you this right now. Look at this. An Iris Christie, a female, death age 97, died in Kingston, Jamaica. Born, death date is in 1983, which puts her birth date at 1886. And it tells us that her spouse is Claudius Christie. I said, okay, Like there could be another woman that lived this long with the exact same name around the exact same area. Let me see if I can locate a death certificate for this Miss Iris Christie. And we were in fact able to locate a death certificate. So let's pull that up here. All right, so we're getting a little more information here. We have this Iris Christie. It tells us that she died of respiratory failure. Okay, check. It tells us that she was married. Okay, check. It tells us that she lived to the ripe old age of 97. Now, he says 93 or 94, but okay, that doesn't put me off at all. Again, she was quite old, and he would have been quite young, and he maybe didn't have that correct. Tells us the birthplace is St. Anne. I'm feeling really good about this. And I'm going, okay, like, let's maybe look into Claudius Christie. Now, of course, what's missing here is we don't have any indication that her name was formerly Finnegan or at all Finnegan. So we're putting this in the maybe pile until we came across something else that was incredibly interesting. All right, guys, happy Friday. You made it to the end of another long week. So recently my husband told me that 23andMe, the company, is going bankrupt. They are going out of business, and it's okay because not on this show, my friends. Business is booming, and Camala's results, her 23andMe results, which we are conducting, they have come back. It is clear what she is and what she is not. And more than anything else, it's really made me realize that we should all aspire to be middle class like her. We're going to talk about that. Plus, there's already fraud in this election. Some major announcements coming out of Pennsylvania and Virginia. We're going to cover them both and tell you why it's important. That's what's coming up on Candace. All right, so today I would like to focus on what it means to come from a middle-class family, because I don't feel like that's just a phrase you can toss around. But it is something that Camala has routinely hit upon as she's hit the road. Case in point, obviously, recently her appearance on The Breakfast Club with Charlamagne tha God. Here's what she said.
Look, I grew up in the middle class. My mother, worked hard, raised me and my sister, and by the time I was in high school, she was able to afford our first home.
There's a couple of things that you said.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeke. There was a couple of things that you said that people would say were talking points, but it's really just your story, even though they are becoming your greatest hits. When you talk about the middle class and your godmother being a small business owner. Mm-hmm. But that's just your story.
It's my story. Mm-hmm. Look, I've been in this race 70 days. Some people are just getting to know me. Yep. Other people have known me.
Talking about your godmother being a small business owner as proof that you're middle class, your godmother, what does that have to do with anything? Of course, none of these people ever fact check her. None of these people are interested in reporting on all the things that we uncovered. They're just trying to keep their heads down and hoping that not enough people will watch this series to realize that virtually everything she says is a lie. And by the way, she also says this when she's stumping on speeches. Take a listen.
I come from the middle class, and I will never forget where I come from.
She definitively forgot where she came from, but it's okay because I am here to remind her. I'm very much here to remind her that she has somehow been memory wiped. And even her father, he writes this glorious piece and says, ancestry unknown to me. For whatever reason, they have descended within a fog of amnesia. All right, so we know already that Camala is a dyed-in-the-wool communist. That is just an absolute fact, but I don't really think Americans quite appreciate what communism means yet because it hasn't exactly arrived on our shores fully. Americans don't quite compute why it is that the Cubans freak out, why the Cubans are voting Republican. They know exactly what communism is. They know what happened to their families. It's in their recent memories. They don't, the Americans, us Americans, don't really compute the suffering and the starvation and the death that always follows a communist regime. And they don't even really, I think if you polled the average American or the average American student, don't even really know who the forefathers of communism were. So I'd already explained this in a former episode, but essentially those that were involved in the slave trade and were reluctant to let it go, when they said, okay, never mind, no more, it's been abolished, it would make sense that they then became communists, right? Okay, well, if you're interested in controlling people and you want to really own people, and you now recognize that you can't physically enslave those people to do your bidding, well, then you realize that you have to then control the government and enslave them in almost a sneakier way. So In a slave master environment, you are the master, you force the slaves that you own to work, and then you reap all the benefits, right? The slaves are poor, maybe they're living in tents, whatever it is, and you are everything that they've picking cotton, you're taking the cotton, you're selling it, and you're making tons of money. You've got this amazing plantation. In a communist government, you get dumb people to vote you in. Like, you're still the masters, but you're like, okay, we've got to get into the government. Dumb people are going to vote us in. And how we're going to get them to do that is just blaming what are really just like causal economic disparities. Like, it would make sense that a person that doesn't go to work, doesn't want to work, and is lazy is making less money than somebody who works 50 hours a week. But they just go, oh, look, there's a disparity that exists. There's an economic disparity that exists. And they then just blame some cosmic injustice. Oh, it's because she's a woman, or it's because, it's because it's a white person, or it's because you're Hispanic. And so that's how these to-be masters get these people to vote them into power. Like, the government is going to solve this, when in reality, the government is just the new master, and the government is going to reap all of the benefits when you vote them in. And they're going to do that through more and more taxation and more regulation. So you're going to go to work just like the slaves did, and then they're going to be like, sorry, but there's all of these disparities that we, the government, have to fix. And how we're going to do that is we're going to just like take 90% of your check. We're gonna share everything. We're taking it because we're gonna divide it. You're not gonna see how we're gonna do that, and it doesn't really matter if this person works this many hours or this person. Everyone's just gonna have the same results, which is the government taking everything. We're going to own and operate everything. And we've seen what has happened, the last 100 years. Over 100 million people have died because of communism. But again, Americans are not yet awake to that sort of devastation. Anyways, I'm bringing that up because when Donald Harris wrote in his piece about his grandma, allegedly Miss Chrissy Brown, her adoration for Alexander Bustamante and his politics, I knew something was very wrong there. When I began to look into Scamala's mother, who we're going to discuss on Monday with a journalist who knows a lot about that family, and realized that she too came from a wealthy family of communists, I realized that something was very, very wrong there, extraordinarily wrong there. So Scamala's family, as we have determined, on her father's side, so we know she's 50% Indian, right? We got that on the genealogy chart. Okay, she's 50% Indian. But on her father's side, we know that it's comprised of Harrises and Browns, and that they were the slavers in St. Anne. The Harris family, by the way, we have learned was formerly the Solomon family, bore the Solomon surname when they were in England before they settled in Jamaica. It was, as we spoke about in the last couple of episodes, a Sephardic Jewish family that settled, enslaved, and then when there was no more slavery, they ran the sugar plantations. Slavery got abolished, and they still were the masters of plantations, but with different political concerns, because now all of a sudden policy matters, okay? It matters a lot if you're going to want to re-enslave these people. So I got quite obsessed in the last 48 hours with trying to locate and learn more about this Christiana Brown. First and foremost, because I just don't feel like this is her. And despite everything that Donald tells us about her and her politics and how involved she was and how she was running these dry goods stores in his piece, I can only locate a Christiana Brown who was a laundress at some point, like a person who was washing clothes. That was her responsibility. And she appeared in a court hearing that had to deal with election fraud. So that was a major red flag for me. So I start crawling through more and more articles, still can't find anything on her. So I decided to instead renew my focus on her alleged husband. Okay, Joseph Alexander Brown. He looks like a fine gentleman, well dressed up in that photo, okay? And I just wanted to learn as much as I could about this individual, because I realized that it would paint a broader picture for me about this family, which I am now recognizing was extraordinarily powerful, perhaps all throughout time, by the way. Like, I think these families kind of reappear in new countries, know how to implement systems, get with the times, they're way advanced, they know how to put themselves on the right boards of governance and make sure that they are informing policy. So I stumbled upon a hit. And by the way, we can get that chart up just so we can show who Joseph Alexander is, so that you guys are following this. So you have Oscar Joseph, right? So you have Donald Harris there at the bottom. That's Scamala's dad. Then you have Oscar Joseph, and we are told that Oscar Joseph's parents are Joseph Alexander, the Syrian Jew landowner. We know these as a fact, and that he allegedly married Miss Chrissy Brown. So she should be Chrissy Brown Harris. I can't find anything on this woman, and I'm feeling that might not be a picture of her. I don't know if these two look like they're exactly a match to me, but perhaps they are. Anyways, so I'm looking for Joseph Alexander Harris, and I do get a hit about a Joseph Harris, and it was a wedding piece. And I'm going to show you that, pertaining to a woman named Adele Harris. And this is in the Kingston Gleaner, and it informs us that at the Sacred Heart Trinidad, Port of Spain, on the 20th of September. And by the way, this is in 1906, by the Reverend Father Casey George Gonsalves of the West Indian Telegraph Company, got married to Adele Matilda, the granddaughter of the late Joseph Harris of Brownstown, St. Anne. Okay. So for clarity, Adele would have been the cousin to the patriarch Joseph Alexander. Again, showing you this on the chart because you're seeing, I'm going to tell you why this woman became of interest to me. I don't have a picture of her, and just showing you like that just would have been the cousin of Joseph Alexander. So this became of interest to me because of something else that I found out about her and her family. So, and I'm going to go back and tell you, my husband always leaves like books on the bedside that he wants me to read. And a while ago, like kind of actually when we first got married, my husband made me read this book, which was entitled The World for Sale. It was sort of like an early baptism for me into the world of commodities. It was a very interesting read, really just to understand that our viewpoints are so molecular when we are reading the news and trying to digest world events. Really, everything revolves around commodities. Like what is for sale in the world? Okay. Is it human? Is it human cattle? Okay. Then everything that's happening, you can war, politics, policy is all going to be based on that. And they kind of shut the rest of the world out. Like, so you don't realize that they're really going to war because they want oil, right? They're telling you it's really because there's a terrorist here or there's a terrorist there. You don't realize people are really going to war because they found gold, but you're hearing like it's, I don't know, maybe they wanted to expand into a different territory. Everything you learn in school is just a nice little fairy tale, that's really just designed to make you feel and think that there was like this human emotion behind all of these wars that are happening and things that are happening, when reality, it just comes down to commodities and what is for sale and who can make money and how. So you have to imagine during this period in Kamala's life, right? Her family was at the top, as far as we can go back, they were at the tippity top of the agricultural revolution, followed by the first industrial revolution. Like, they owned slaves, right? So they were extraordinarily wealthy, like I said, and you're not just going to let that wealth go. You're not going to be like, okay, well, now they abolished slavery, so I'm good with that. So we know what followed the first industrial revolution was the second industrial revolution. So if you are a slave owner and you are looking to make sure that you maintain your wealth and your influence, what is the next industry that you're going to get into during this timeline? The answer to that is oil. Oil kind of became the next big thing to get into. And so I couldn't find anything about Adele, but then I did learn that this family, for whatever reason, decided to become Catholic. Maybe they were compelled by faith, but we had discussed that even on the Bravo Harris side, that suddenly everyone kind of converted into various Christian denominations, this one being Catholic, and they got into the oil industry. And I found this because Adele had a child. She had two children, and one of them had a very thorough obituary written about him on an ancestry site, and that person was George. Again, I can show you this chart. Here he is. This is in memoriam. It says Vin. He went by Vin, but his name was George Vincent Gonsalves. Okay, so despite the fact that he was an English Jew, they converted to Catholicism, and now they've kind of got this Spanish last name. Okay, look at this obituary. And I'm going to tell you why this matters to me. This is our dad, Vin Gonsalves was born on the 13th of July, 1914, in the Great House at Marble Hill near St. John's, Antigua. He was the third child and the second son of planter George Reginald Reggie Gonsalves and Adele Matilda Harris, the first to be born in Antigua. His elder siblings were both born in Jamaica, as was his mother. So every side of the family, they were involved in commodities. Dad attended Antigua Grammar School until he was 10, when dark clouds changed the family life drastically. Our grandfather sold one commodity, cane sugar, as we know. They were all running sugar plantations in Scamala's family. And he dealt with Red Path Sugar Company in Montreal. By the way, I think that's going to be a clue. I tend on exploring that over the weekend. He had a sister, Sarah Mildred, in Montreal. Her husband, Reggie's brother-in-law, Antonio Rodriguez, appears to have handled some of his business there. In the early 1920s, cane sugar became a depressed commodity. Beet sugar was produced cheaper than cane sugar could be. Cane sugar production was very labor-intensive. The two family estates ran up huge debts. Then disaster happened. Reggie died. Our grandmother had no business experience. With the help of her brother-in-law, had to liquidate the estates for little or nothing in return. Adele decided to move to Trinidad with her 5 children. Life was not easy for them. I don't believe that. But they were able to survive on little. The Depression started early for them. By 1931, the eldest of my father's siblings, Mary Louise, married a wealthy Venezuelan and went to live in Caracas. Okay, that is of tremendous interest to me. So instantly I said, okay, oil. That's very interesting. And I can't find this Mary Louise. I did find her birth certificate. She was actually born Maria Louise. Here it is right here. She was born, Marie Louise, and the last name is Gonsalves. She was born in Jamaica. All of that checks out. And then she virtually disappears. And were it not for this obituary, you would not be able to attach her to her brother or her parents because they have wiped any trace of her being attached to her parents on all of the ancestral sites. Like when you look him up, it doesn't say that he has a sister anywhere. But fortunately, we found this obituary, which was really done by the other side of his family. Anyways, the second portion is interesting too. So the sister is married into oil in Venezuela. And let's see what he did. Vin worked with Esso, an American oil company, in the accounting department and rose to the position of comptroller of accounts for the Caribbean area. His employment took him, Madge, and their 3 children to reside in Santo Domingo, Cuba, and Miami, where he finally retired to reside with his wife and family. This, apart from an initial spell of duty in Trinidad, Vin was highly regarded by his employers, who depended on his utter reliability, okay? All of his employees, and business acquaintances and friends regarded him with respect and endearment. So he had employees, he's working for an American oil company. This guy's high up. Now, this last piece gets super interesting. On his last foreign assignment as chief accountant for Esso in Havana, Cuba, Vin, Madge, and their 3 children were among the huge crowd to welcome and congratulate their new leader, the victorious Fidel Castro, when he arrived in the Havana waterfront on the famous boat Granma. Meticulous Vin, who kept detailed records of certain events, also had a comprehensive library of home movies, which included 16mm movie recording of that memorable occasion, which clearly shows George, Virginia, Douglas, and of course, Fidel Castro. I saw this movie at their Miami home. However, it was soon afterwards that Mr. Castro declared his real intentions of transforming Cuba into a communist state. Oh, I'm sure that they were so surprised by this. Panic set in. All who could left hurriedly for Miami. Vin sent his family, excepting George, to Miami to await his arrival. George offered to stay with his dad, which was very good. But this is called love. Noble Vincent gallantly decided to remain in Cuba to try to complete his job as the chief of Esso's office. You see, Castro had ordered his army to confiscate all American and foreign property, but why make the transition easy? After shipping the most vital information and files to Miami, it was decided to destroy all the remaining records. This is what Vin did. All the Cubans got was confettis and shreddies. Vin and George had to run for their lives and caught one of the last flights from Havana to Miami. This was the kind of stuff which Vin was made. So I call bullshit on those last 2 sentences. It's just a thing that everybody does. After they work with communist governments and they're corrupt, they then try to tell their families like stories, like, or they try to sell to the public, like, no, we worked with Fidel Castro and there's like, yeah, there's evidence that we stayed there and like he was starving his people and we were working on behalf of oil companies, but we were lucky. We made the very last flight out and all was good. Like I mean, just happened to be like wherever we go, there's just communism in our family, but like it's not us. We fortunately escape with our lives. No, I smell a family. When I was reading this and realizing that now it looks like I'm going to be able to find Scamala's family with new Spanish names in Venezuela. Don't know if you've checked into Venezuela lately, but that also got robbed by communism due to people that, well, I would say probably had an interest in their oil. A lot of oil. It should really be the richest country in the world, but it's not because of communism. And so I just don't like that everywhere this Harris family goes, communism accidentally follows, okay? So I am looking for this Marie Louise who married a wealthy Venezuelan. I also strangely found the last name Castro as I was trying to search through some records. And I think this is actually really important. And even though we're talking about who would be Scamala's cousins, I do also know, and this kind of made me think of the Rothschilds story of like the banking dynasty where he sent his sons to different corners of the world to start banks. And I'm thinking like this is sort of looking a lot like maybe family members got sent to different corners and got involved in politics, but we are dealing with a family that has always had a lot of power through every century, and it concerns me. Okay, when we start running up and dealing with oil and we start hitting up against Fidel Castro and we're talking about slavery and we're talking about a woman, maybe that's why she dropped the Latina accent. Maybe she's just like her auntie and she was just like, oh, sorry, I forgot I was not in Venezuela. But like we're dealing with a family that seems to morph according to whatever they feel they need to sell themselves as to gain power. I, again, want to state that Scamala and her family are incredibly dangerous people. This woman did not grow up middle class. She grew up, her mother's family was extraordinarily wealthy, and her father's family was extraordinarily wealthy. And it was confirmed to me by her own relatives that her father was handed a business in Jamaica. This is not your middle class person doesn't just like wake up and go, oh, okay, you descend from unbelievably wealthy slavers and plantation owners and sugar plantation supervisors and Standard Oil people. And like, yeah, sure, like there's some video footage of you and Fidel Castro, but you girl, you're in these streets. You are from these streets. I cannot impress enough that Scamala Harris is potentially an incredibly dangerous person. I know that we are already in the middle of people voting, but as much as you can work to get this information out there, I am telling you, there's something dark. And I think, and when I say something dark, I don't mean a black person. There's not a black person miles and miles within this family. I can't find one black person. But I'm thinking that the melanin, if my guess is correct, is going to come from an Indian that may be in her family, because we know that Indians were involved in the sugar trade. From every indication that I have, this family settled from Jamaica, from the UK, and I think that they were involved in the East India Company. So like I said, a family that constantly morphs but maintains their power according to the times and with the power behind them of the mainstream media. So I want to take a pause on that, and we will, of course, have so many things to report on Monday, because we will be sitting down with that journalist who has a lot of things to share about Scamala's mother, who we haven't even started on Scamala's mother, because this was really just an investigation to get to the bottom of whether or not she was black. And I'm looking everywhere like that meme, and I can't even find one dot.
You see Candace Owens going all in on where she's from. If Kamala Harris wins, we really gonna catch hell. You know why? She gonna make us pay for everybody who exposed the fact that she was never black. Now it's a spiteful neglect. I'm gonna get you ninjas back for exposing the fact that I was never black.